We have done a lot to train AI on the skills that we have done. Now they're all digital, it's all there. Businesses aren't set up typically for innovation and new ideas and big pivots. They want something that's tangible. And one of the real challenges with strategy is
Jonah Burlingame is a strategic storyteller helping visionaries turn bold ideas into reality. With roots in design and tech, Jonah now works with senior leaders to craft clear visions and strategic narratives that rally organizations, foster advocacy for transformation, and set them on a path of ongoing growth.
Talk to me about your approach from a business perspective and integrating that creativity in terms of how you work with people.
I love collaboration. I really enjoy the magic that happens whenever two or more people come together.
If I think about like weaving people and like all the different kind of patterns and different things come up, how does that your brain mesh all those things together?
For me, taking abstract ideas and making them concrete, taking strategy and you're turning it into action.
How you see creativity, AI integrating together in terms of what you do and the business landscape.
So if you look at it from that perspective, it's a really great tool if you apply it correctly.
In your own words, define what Built for This means to you. All right, welcome back to another episode of Built for This, the podcast where we dive into the stories behind grit, growth, and defining moments of founders, leaders, and creatives. Today, I'm joined with somebody who lives at the intersection of strategy and story, Jonah Burlingame. I'm excited to have him here. He's spent over 15 years helping companies define their strategic direction, but what makes his work truly unique is how he fuses storytelling, systems thinking, and artistic creativity to drive clarity and momentum. He's a strategist, a painter, an AI innovator, and someone who truly embodies what it means to build from a place of vision and depth. So I'm excited to dive in. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Amazing. So like with kind of each guest, I always love to start kind of at the beginning, the roots of where it all gets started, to understand a little bit more about how you grew up and sort of how you kind of got into the world of art.
Oh, start with art. Okay, great. Yeah, so I was born in San Francisco, but my parents were hippies and a lot of things happened and they moved back to where they were from, which was in Ohio. So I was raised in Northeast Ohio. I started my artistic journey I took some art classes in college and, of course, learned all of the basics and started copying some of the artists that I really loved. I took art history and so forth. But it wasn't until I found an artist at an art show who was using non-traditional implements to paint. He wasn't using a brush. He was using a window squeegee. And I thought that was fascinating. Well, one day while I was renovating my home, I took an old hollow core door and it was on some sawhorses and I put some paint down and I took a window squeegee just to see what that would feel like. And I was just amazed at the results of it. And I said, well, I'll let that dry and then I think I'll put some varnish on it so that, I don't mess that up in case the next layer that I do is. So I didn't have a lot of confidence in what I was doing at the time. And I had been painting with brushes up to that point. And I found myself continually doing these layers with paint and varnish, and then I would sand down. And it was at that point I discovered my artistic voice. Even though I was using a similar implement as the artist that I had, that inspired me, my work looked completely different. But it started me on this journey. And so I was creating things for my own walls. I didn't have any money and I was tired of posters. So I started putting these things on my walls. Then my friends started seeing them and said, would you create something for me? And it's kind of slowly built to where I was able to start charging for those things. And I entered art shows and so forth. But when I moved to San Francisco in 2000, I think it was, I realized that I was in a different art market and I wanted to see, do I really have what it takes to be an artist in a major art market? And so I joined Open Studios, started showing my work, and it resonated really well. Somebody from Design Within Reach, if you're familiar with that, high-end furnishing store, contacted me and they were staging homes and doing photo shoots for Design Within Reach. And they rented my artwork and put it in these homes as part of the photo shoot. And it was that trajectory that just kind of took off from there. And I continue to paint and show and sell, all over the world at the moment. So.
That's super cool. And I'm curious at what point, because most people, I mean, with a creative edge, kind of it's their side hobby. They do it for fun and aren't lucky necessarily enough to end up always making money from what they create. But how did the intersection of art meets business happen? Also being in San Francisco, also, the high tech and everything kind of happening within that area. So how did you kind of fuse both those or decide, hey, I want to kind of do two things at once?
Yeah, I guess to me, I didn't really see it as a big separation. I mean, I kind of live my life. I am multifaceted and I just pursue my passions. And so, I have a passion for business and making sense of that world. And being an artist, you then learn that you have to be, you have to have a business mind if you're going to be successful in it. And I learned that a lot of my colleagues, my artist colleagues, didn't really have that business mind. So I got to collaborate with them and help create shows and things for them and kind of educate them on, how to approach it as a business without, taking away that magic that is being an artist. Some of that is you have to suspend that reality. And I think if you pursue it from a business perspective, you may lose touch with what it is to you in terms of an artistic pursuit and of expression and so forth. So you have to balance those, and that's always something to kind of keep in mind. For
Yeah,
sure.
and I know you mentioned a word which I love to use is multifaceted. Every human is, but I think sometimes, especially given the culture and world we live in, I think there's a lot of pressure to just be one thing. And it's not necessarily always encouraged or welcome to kind of be okay with making different moves, going after multiple passions at once. And it's funny because every kind of professional athlete I've talked to is, I grew up playing lots of sports. I think all athletes should grow up playing lots of sports until you kind of figure out which
Mm.
one is the thing for you. But all those skills help them be better athletes. And I think that that's the same regardless of what avenue you take, is the more you learn, as you realize, kind of the more you can cascade those transferable skill sets into other things. And I'm curious because you mentioned you kind of had hippie parents. Did you grow up in a way that it was just encouraged to kind of do all the things and be whatever you wanted to be, or that you could be more than one thing? Or sort of how did you kind of recognize that and really lean into that?
For sure. My parents did encourage creativity early on. It was rewarded. It was something that even like for Father's Day, let's say, rather than buying a card or buying a gift, they really celebrated when I made the card or when my sister and I would do a performance. We would maybe do a little one or two person show or something for them, and that was our gift. And so that was something that was really celebrated, and I really liked that connection of thinking and giving of yourself to somebody else to entertain them or to engage with them. And so that's from an early age that was really important and instilled in me.
Yeah. And kind of talk to me about sort of your approach from a business perspective and sort of, integrating that creativity in terms of how you work with people.
Absolutely. Well, I love collaboration. I think that, there is the creativity that comes from one person, but I really enjoy the magic that happens whenever two or more people come together and create something that was not there earlier, and they kind of build upon themselves or on each other. Music is really important to me, and maybe about 15 years ago I started playing music with other people, and it's very different to sit and play guitar by yourself versus in a band setting. And I often equate working with clients or doing a workshop or whatever it may be similar to that feeling that when you're in a band and suddenly you're creating magic out of the ether and you're listening to somebody else and you're responding to it, you're giving them space, but you're also challenging them, right? The entire time. It's a lot like creating music is like doing a workshop and bringing people together that have different skills, different perspectives, and suddenly, something that seemed like a crazy idea that you threw out there knowing that people would laugh at it and feeling a little bit vulnerable, it creates an idea from their lived experience. oh, well, what would it mean if we did this? And then suddenly that becomes viable and interesting and innovative. And to me, that's a beautiful moment. And the more of those moments that you can create, the more, I don't know, I think the more exciting business can be, more exciting life can be.
Yeah, it reminds me of I was just at Summit this past week in Detroit, and there was a talk with Kat Cole of AG1 and the president of Burning Man, and the talk of the seriousness of play in
Right.
business, and her talking about her kind of growing up young and being very successful, being in a leadership position and being very serious, and then having to get feedback about like, she's great, sometimes she's funny, but she's definitely not fun. And having to figure out how to
Yeah.
soften and engage that in a way where there could be that playful experience. So do you find that there's a certain type of client that you work with that's just natural to them and that's where they really want to focus and bringing that creativity in? Or have you structured kind of exercises to help bring that out to create that space? Because as you mentioned, when it's somebody saying their idea for the first time, there is vulnerability, or is this going to be stupid? And I'm not sure if I want to say this out loud. So I'm curious how you kind of help foster that in those settings.
That's a really good question. Um, I often work with senior leaders who do want to explore new ideas. They see that there is an opportunity for emerging technologies, let's say, to change or to enhance their businesses, and they want to be on the forefront of that. So they often have a willingness to explore that. Don't know exactly what it is, but to do anything big requires collaboration across functional departments within an organization. So, how do you engage people with different goals, different resources, different perspectives, and different mandates within the organization to get on board with that when it's something new and additive? If this is a new idea, then this is added work that's coming onto their plates in addition to what they're already doing. So, it's really important, and a lot of the work that I've been doing in the past, let's say 5 years or more, is really addressing that part of the business in understanding how do you get people to want to engage with something new, knowing that it adds work to their day to day, and that's not really what they're rewarded for. Uh, it's a lot of understanding their perspective. Where are they coming from? What are their hopes, their dreams, their fears, and their capabilities? And how do you tie that story? This is where the storytelling comes into it, right? How do you tie their perspective into the overarching strategic objective so that they can see themselves in this? How do you give them a vision for what, if we all work together, can be something much bigger and magical, right? And then how do you align what they're doing today toward that vision so it doesn't seem like it's additive or disruptive to what they're doing, but it actually feels like, oh, now we're weaving all of these initiatives that we're doing together with intention toward that vision, and now everything starts to make sense. The work becomes easier at that point when things make sense and it doesn't seem like a bunch of little fires that are lit around the organization. It feels like, no, we're actually kind of creating something. We're creating heat together that's actually going to get us to where we know we can be. And I don't know. So that's a lot of it, is understanding on the human level where
Yeah.
people are, meet them where they're at, and then help create those strategic narratives that tie that together for them.
Yeah, and I'm curious, and obviously, such a big topic right now is AI in everything, eliminations of things, and obviously storytelling and the creative side being a really big kind of place of disruption with all these new tools coming in, with AI being able to create and build things quicker, but still requiring that human interaction to hone in and I think refine what said AI is able to create. So I'm curious, kind of from your side, of how you see, creativity, AI kind of integrating together in terms of sort of what you do and the business landscape.
It's a huge topic and one that people are talking about it, and we should continue to talk about it because there certainly is a lot of promise. There are a lot of things that it is going to be able to do very well. I mean, specifically, it's really good at If you take hallucinations aside, which, accuracy, right? It can look at large data sets and give you some things that are very accurate. It's obviously very fast, so speed and scale. You can do things at scale that you couldn't do, manually. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's a really great tool if you apply it correctly. And I think it will transform and already starting to transform our daily interactions and how we work and how we even play. There is, I think, maybe an over exuberance in trying to put AI on everything, just because I think there's a lot of pressure from shareholders and others to say, what's our AI strategy? We got to get AI in there. And I think and part of what I feel is a responsibility is to help usher in these new tools in benefit to humanity. How are we going to do this responsibly so that we don't find ourselves putting these tools just in the hands of the few and the rest of us are really going to be cogs in the machine? How can we, really make these things valuable tools for all of us? And I don't think we can necessarily resist what the capabilities are, but we can shape how they're adopted and the conversations we have for their responsible use. And, my goal in working with companies is to understand these new technologies, say, where is there a benefit that the company can actually help their customers solve real problems or, do good things, and create that long-term relationship between the company and their customers to actually do good things, and employees as well. So it's a real challenge, and we need more people leaning into that for sure. And we need leaders in government. We need leaders in organizations to understand that this is a big moment, probably something like we've never seen before in our lifetimes. But I do think that as big of a disruption as AI is, the real challenge is not the capabilities so much. It's the pace of change that's coming. Most people are not capable of changing their skill sets, their understanding, their worldviews, and all of these things that quickly. So it's the pace of change that is the real danger here. And a lot of people are going to feel left out if they're not leaning in. And it's hard to keep up with. And even as much as I am leaning in so far into AI, I don't feel like an expert. And I feel like I have to talk to other people constantly to triangulate what is going on. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? It's just happening so fast. And, if I'm leaning in and paying attention, and this is my work, and I feel like somewhat inadequate in really understanding it all, just imagine what happens if you are not paying attention and you're somewhere else in the country that is not in, the center of technology. You're going to feel left out, and that's a real problem.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, and as somebody who's obviously leaning into that and understanding how much it can affect my productivity or what other tools I can use to add value to clients that I'm working with, or again, how can I make this faster so I have more time? And there's always some sort of new thing coming out, what it seems like could be daily or weekly, of like, now it has this function, now it has this, try this. You're like, oh my goodness. There's not enough hours in the day to kind of really develop that like deep subject matter expertise when you have other things to do, if your sole purpose is not to just play with AI all day and see what you can do. And I'm curious if you're having any kind of big conversations with the companies that you're working with from a people capital perspective of like, okay, we can help our customers, but what are we going to do with our team in terms of like training or kind of getting them to level up or retraining? Like there's so much to do of, matching elimination of roles in their entirety, and or how do we now completely look at redesigning our org chart in a way that still is in line with our values, but we now have to flip a model where a lot of it's going to be almost in training and development versus necessarily maybe core competencies and filling I call it like a right person, right seat, because that seat might not actually exist for them anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think what you're seeing now is a lot of the collapsing of the talent stack, right? Where it may have taken 3 people with different disciplines to come together to do something. Now you can probably collapse that down to 1 with AI tools, and they're a bit more of a generalist, but they have the expertise to pull things, from AI. I mean, we have done a lot to train AI on the skills that we have done. Now they're all digital, it's all there, and it can pull up best practices, and best in class design, code, all of those things. I
Yeah.
think what a lot of companies I'm working with, more in the maybe mid-size organizations as of late, they're starting small. They're looking at where do we have the greatest friction in the organization that is either incredibly time consuming in its drudgery or ripe for error, or, we're not competitive because we can't turn around a decision like competitors do, right? So they're looking at those moments to say, let's see what we can add AI to automate those processes to make staff happier, to make customers happier, and so forth. I think that eventually you'll run out of those use cases and it will become much larger. Like, what else can we do? And can we start cutting, workforce or hiring different people for different skill sets? That's something that, that's that responsibility aspect of it. If a company can be all AI for the most part, and people are not um, employed, who's buying those products,
Yeah.
right? You almost have to have this bigger notion of, let's create something that creates an ecosystem of, people can still buy these products and we're still serving them, and they can still, I know Henry Ford is an antiquated reference, but, that was really what he was doing when he created his plant. He wanted to, have people build the cars and be able to afford the cars, and continue that cycle. He was thinking in terms of more or less that ecosystem. So,
And I'm curious in terms of, the AI kind of lens and looking at that. And I know, depending on a style of company, depending on sort of leadership, whether it's like a legacy company and or we'll call it more innovative from a tech perspective, you have people that are naturally resistant to everything kind of technology is bringing, and they're like, I don't want to do that. How are you kind of working within those leadership dynamics to, hold space for those conversations, to be able to really kind of engage them in this new kind of AI landscape where there is, friction depending on what you do and how you do it?
I like to give space for all perspectives when working with folks. And what really gets interesting is not what they're reacting negatively to, but why. Why do they have those feelings? And if you can get to that and understand that they may have perceptions right or wrong, then start to, ask, well, have you experimented with it? Or are you, reading the news? What is it you fear? Um, what is it your experience thus far that we can start talking about there? And, I don't really, I'm not on a mission to sell AI for AI's sake. It is a tool, and I think it can be incredibly powerful and useful. But I also feel like there's a responsibility of, like, it's here and it's coming and evolving quickly. You can't deny that it's here. You can't deny the printing press. You can't deny all of these things. It changes who we are, and you should, at least as a leader, be aware of its capabilities, and their responsibility as a leader to shepherd these things in, and have a point of view that their teams and their colleagues can engage with. So, it's a conversation that you need to have. I have some very smart friends that are a little bit resistant to using it, and they're afraid of it, and I get it. And we have those conversations, and I really try to come at to them, to the conversation, saying, look, I'm not like trying to sell you on this. I'm just saying it's here, and it's a reality. We need to have that conversation. It may be tough love at this point, but let's figure out, if it has a place for you in your work. And if it doesn't, are your colleagues, are your competitors, are they using it? And how's that going to impact you if you're not? right?
For sure. It's kind of when I always think to any kind of, boom that's happened. It's when people are like, oh, what's the internet going to do? And then it's like,
Right.
oh, social media is not a thing. And then this whole new world explodes. And it's kind of, if you're not on the bandwagon, you're going to get left behind. But you do have to, it's not one of those things you can kind of sit back and wait. It's happening so fast. It's just the speed, as you mentioned, is so intense. It's like, can we keep up with the amount of changes happening so quickly across the board in so many different ways? And I know, storytelling is such a big piece of what you do. And I'm so curious, kind of for you, the foundation of like the art of the narrative of like driving change and sort of why, you feel leaders must frame strategy as a story to kind of like rally people together.
So for many years, I've worked with top brands on innovative ideas. It was cryptocurrency and blockchain, and AR, VR, metaverse. And, they have questions. They say, okay, this is a buzz. This is happening. What's our strategy? And we want to explore this. So I will help them with those types of things. And, sometimes it's really hard to connect the dots between, well, here's what it could be, and here's where you are today. And you can't leave that. I mean, the fun work is coming up with the ideas and the what ifs and the vision and so forth. But so often, you would end with a PowerPoint deck and say, well, here's the result of that exploration, and it goes nowhere. And that never really resonated with me because I think there's something missing that's not a strategy if you aren't doing anything with that work. And so that's why about 5 years ago, I started kind of looking into the organization itself and focusing more on, well, what is it that needs to happen internally for that exploration to really kind of change how the business runs, because businesses aren't set up typically for innovation and new ideas and big pivots. They're set up to something that's predictable, and we're going to keep the cogs moving, and we're going to deliver on these things daily, weekly, quarterly, yearly, right? And that's how they're measured, and that's how they deliver. And so, like I said earlier, big ideas dropped on a desk of multiple teams is not met with, open arms. They're saying, oh, great. What's the priority now? Is it
Yeah.
this or what we have been working on? Because something has to give. And so what I do, I call it storytelling because I think that's ultimately the differentiation of what I deliver. Yes, I deliver on an exploration, looking across the landscape, understanding the capabilities, and really try to help inform the greater business strategy with the capabilities of these emerging technologies and where they could play. What is their competitive differentiation that's sustainable over time? What is a vision for how they can adopt this? And what does that look like for their customers and for their operations internally? And then when you have something as powerful as a prototype that is the manifestation of that strategy, and it's not just bullet points or graphs in a PowerPoint deck, it suddenly becomes tangible. And one of the real challenges with strategy is it's abstract. It's something that a lot of senior leaders are good at being able to think in that abstract layer and that level, but the internal folks are thinking tactically. They want something that's tangible, right? What does that mean? How do I translate bullet points into requirements? And that's where the gap is in a lot of organizations, and how you can create that narrative. And when I say narrative, it's not necessarily just a written prose that says, here's how you talk about it. There is language that you want to use, certainly, so that people understand it, what it is and what it isn't. But that prototype is incredibly important. And in fact, I was working with a company recently where I've just come back in for a second round. I worked with them 2 years ago, and about 9 months ago, they asked me to come back to do something else. And the work that I did there was, I did deliver a deck that was for strategic leaders, and it did have bullet points and charts. You got it. It's part of the
Some
deliverable.
things you can't escape no matter what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, they're important, and they speak to a certain level. But the prototype that I created, which has various flows in it that various functional leaders across the organization could see themselves delivering upon in this bigger vision, in this prototype, it's still being referenced today, 2 years later. right? They see that as part of their decision making tool to be able to say, okay, we're working on this. Well, how's that going to fit into our vision? And they go back to that as a North Star, if you will, to help guide their decisions for what they're doing today. Right. So it wasn't delivered as a disruption. It was delivered as something that was a vision that unites all what they're doing. And now all of the things that they're doing are being referenced toward that vision ongoing. And they're not looking at the PowerPoint deck. They're looking at the prototype. And
Yeah,
so it's
and
that narrative that they tell internally, right, through that illustration of the prototype that is unifying within the organization.
And I think so often too, and I always think of it kind of through a people lens and onboarding and kind of building the team. And often the gap is whenever there's friction, or as you mentioned, when things get pivoted quickly, or like what feels like a very quick decision from, an executive, which may not be, it might have been 6 months in the making, but
Right.
feels like all of the sudden to the team, is always is what I'm doing actually making a difference?
Yes.
And I'm curious, from your perspective of why is that the hardest piece? I think even from like a founder level of, yes, they're generally a bit more visionary and kind of seeing things that nobody else does. And, we're going this way. And like, maybe they have a great story. But again, that distilling it down to what does it mean for the people who are executing? I've had a few different experiences. One where it's very easy to take what they want and break it down because it's super crystal clear in terms of division. So my brain's able to compartmentalize that
Right.
into actionable chunks. But then you also sometimes have a team of executives or a very operational founder in some cases, if they're in kind of growth mode and they're still holding onto the reins before there is a bit more help, is getting them to understand why their vision isn't easy to understand and that people need more. And like, how do you kind of break that barrier? How do you help them, simplify that down when the exciting part to them is this big thing and the other pieces that fall underneath it are just like, oh, this is so painful. Like, why don't people just get it? And they just want to move really fast.
Yeah. So part of it is defining the horizon line by which that vision really is. If it's incremental innovation, that means you probably can achieve it next year or, within a year or so. And that seems a little bit more easy to translate that strategy to the actions, right? But if you are looking like 2 years, maybe 3 or 5 years out, then that becomes a little bit harder for people to hold in their heads of, well, this is what this means, right? So oftentimes so much changes within that time that, is this real? It seems so far away from what we had talked about, right? And so it's really, I think, important to create roadmaps that are very tangible to people. That I like to put the roadmaps, even though I put them kind of like 3 or 4 or 5 phases, they're somewhat false segmentation because you don't have to take features and deliver them all in one phase. You can do it incrementally over time. But if you take each one of those phases and you give it a name that describes the intent or the objective within each one of those phases, sometimes the first phase is foundational. The second phase is really about growth. And then the third phase is maybe about extension, right? And so then all of the feature sets start to make sense of why you're delivering and prioritizing things at that time. These things are foundational. We must get these in order to do the next thing. And our expectations are set that this is what we're delivering at this point. The next phase is going to be about growth and, scaling that. Okay, now we know why we're making decisions from a marketing feature level, back end, data level, all of those things. And then when you extend, you're saying, okay, we're going to take that and we're going to create a deeper relationship with customers, and we may be able to kind of start to sell them other things or whatever it may be. And so it starts to make sense for people how you're going to get there, and they can start to reference that. So you've got a prototype that says, here's the vision, this is what it looks like. And then you have the roadmap saying, and here's how we're going to get there. And
Yeah.
here is, like, I think all of those things are part of the story when people can intentionally understand the names of the phases and just being able to kind of hold that in their heads. The stories endure, the requirements and all those things don't. But if they can come back from the story and really understand why they're doing and build that into their overall day to day, then it does stick, right? We all remember stories.
For sure. And I'm curious in terms of kind of the roadmap and phases, once those are created, of kind of other, I mean, maybe tips or tools for somebody maybe who's kind of in that phase and a little bit stuck. And I think sometimes, especially in growth mode, you iterate quickly. So sometimes those roadmaps can change pretty rapidly depending on where you're at. And from a communication standpoint, small team or larger team, what do you suggest in terms of having those roadmaps as like visual pieces that you're constantly going back to and showing to keep everybody rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, I think they're really important to have as artifacts, but they are just artifacts of a time, right?
Yeah.
So when the vision is created, we talk about the implications of that vision on the business. All the leaders from the various functional units come together and they talk about those things from the engineering, marketing, product design, all of these things, right? And you make some decisions and saying, well, here's what customers wanted, or really what resonated with customers. Here's what's you do a matrix, of impact versus effort, and you kind of look at what's low hanging fruit that's somewhat easy, and that helps make decisions. And everybody weighs in on the roadmap, so there's some buy-in at that point. Right? They love the vision. They believe in it. Now they're contributing to the roadmap. So now there's some advocacy for, well, that's the what, and we know the why. Now here's the how, and we're all starting to actually envision on how we build that. So they have ownership of that roadmap. They've contributed that moment in time to make that roadmap. And then over time, they need to revisit that. They need to say, okay, what has changed between now and then? Let's look at the features. Do we bring something up? Do we deprecate something? Whatever it may be. But that's an ongoing discussion. But my goal is that I've helped coach the organization through that so that they know how to think about that. They have the ownership and they feel like that is theirs. That roadmap isn't mine, that's theirs. I have the framework for how to think about it and I get them there, and then they need to feel that ownership and move forward.
I love that. And what do you feel from kind of based on your experiences is the most common like misstep you see kind of happening kind of across the board where either, maybe they're thinking about it the wrong way or they're completely missing kind of one crucial piece that's going to be the thing that gets them again, like all connected and getting to where they want to go?
What I have seen time and time again is that there's often somebody in the organization who's a naysayer, and they may not be the top leader. They may be, just right underneath that, but somebody that is just, no, I don't want to do this. Right. And if you don't address that person and figure out why they don't want to do it, and you try to work around them, you will find that in somehow along that path, it becomes a real challenge and you may not make it to market with that idea. I've seen it time and time again. It's like, we'll just bulldoze that person.
Yeah.
And I have found that if you can meet that person where they're at, truly understand this human being and their experience, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, their capabilities, like I said before, you can turn that person into an advocate. They will become your strongest advocate. And that is real magic. That is powerful when you can do that. So what was the saying? Somebody said that, for those who believe that, one person or a small organization can't be disruptive, has never experienced a mosquito, in their bedroom at night, right? It's kind of like that one mosquito is incredibly disruptive, right? And you will lose sleep over it. It's similar to that. You have to address the small things as well and understand that that could have an impact and turn it to your advantage.
Yeah. And it's funny that you bring that up because it's a conversation I have a lot with people of kind of the warning, like, we might want to watch this one. Like, I think there's going to be some resistance here. But, depending on where you're at, and it's funny where I'll call speed meets people, I guess, and the natural tendency to want to bulldoze, or I'll just say rip the Band-Aid off and get rid of that person really quickly if there's that active resistance and not really wanting to understand why they feel that way. And, majority of the time they can be spun around. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on, why as humans or in those environments, we would rather bulldoze than seek to understand.
Because it's hard and it's messy, right? In a business context, you want to make decisions and move forward. When you're dealing with human beings, it's emotional. You have to understand, you have to care, and it may take some time. And as leaders sometimes feel it, power is more important. And let's just okay, that's just one person getting in my way. We need to just kind of bulldoze through. And I have seen situations where that person wasn't coming around anyway, and it was the wrong person in that role, and it's
For
really
sure.
come to light through this initiative, right? Because you need to move the organization forward, and they were never going to come around. Okay, well, that's fine, but I've also seen many instances where people haven't taken the time to understand that person and why they think the way they do, and you can turn them around, and they become very powerful advocates.
I'm kind of hopeful because of this disruption in the AI space that I think that there will be a healthy resistance into how much we let that come in terms of connection. And there'll be this more need and requirement for human connection. So maybe that the patience and tolerance to want to connect with people will grow because of that. And the people that you will be working with, it might be a smaller team depending on what industry you're in or product you're working with all these new technologies, but taking the time to really understand. And, as you mentioned, again, there's going to be situations where it is the wrong person, wrong fit. It's not going to work out. So you do have to make that choice to remove them. But when it is just wanting to be heard or feeling like I didn't get a seat at the table and speak an opinion that I feel has value to the direction we're going. And it's always these simple things. And it's so fascinating to me, meeting with teams or hearing, frustrations from other team members. And nobody just wants to just take a deep breath, kind of ground themselves and just hear it out. And again, you can agree to disagree, but you have to get alignment on the path going forward. And it's funny that, we're in a place where now you're right, like people are messy. Like those are always going to be the big problems or people problems. If it's tactical or fixing out a, supplier, vendor, very transactional. And I think I'm hopeful that we're going to kind of move in a direction where people are a little kinder and hopefully a bit more open to each other in this time of big change.
I hope so. I mean, there's the counter argument that AI, it really set up to please you, and it's almost easier to just ask AI because it just wants to give you the best answers,
Yeah.
and it doesn't argue with you unless you ask it to, right? And so
Yeah.
I hope that you're right. I think it's human nature to kind of take the path of least resistance. And so if we have AI companions that are, just giving us Sunday school answers all the time, I think we might be in trouble. We're actually stronger and better, and our ideas are stronger whenever we receive that friction. And in a workshop environment, I've done countless workshops of even 30 people or more over the course of 5 days. I mean, really intensive things with senior leaders and their teams. And I don't always have control over who I get to invite into those
Yeah.
meetings, and somebody shows up and everybody will give me the aside like that person never likes anything, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, good, I'm glad to know. And so it's really fun to use language and framing with folks like that to be able to start to turn them from everything being a negative answer and we can't do it and shutting it all down into something that is. There's one easy trick that I'll share with you that you may
Yeah.
be familiar with, but it's a statement or the question of how might we, right? So when somebody says, "Oh, well, we could do X, Y, Z," and that person say, "That'll never happen. We did it before, and we don't have the systems to do it." It's like, okay, fair enough. That's grounded in reality. Great. But how might we do that if we did? Well, we'd have to have a new data set, and we'd have to have an API over this, and then we'd have to da da da. Okay. So it is possible, right? So then they start turning it around. And so you just keep asking, how might we do it if we could? And then they start thinking of the solution. Well, that's turning their way of thinking and engaging with the rest of the people in that workshop over time. So that's, coming back to the music analogy, that's that magic in the moment where suddenly people are kind of coming around and playing their strengths into the organization. And sometimes it's fine to have that friction that's challenging these ideas that says, that's going to be really hard to do. Okay,
Yeah.
let's acknowledge that's good. We don't want to live in la la land, but now we can address that sooner because we know that that is a particular friction point and a rock we might need to move later.
Yeah, no, I love that. Language is so powerful. And again, it's always something through interview process or like, building kind of people and culture initiatives. It's interesting when it's a very, I'll call it like the victimhood mentality of everything's happening to me
Yeah.
versus like, I'm like, no one has a gun to your head. You have a choice here. How do you want to do this? Like, are you getting forced to do this? Like somebody telling you you're going to get fired. Well, no, and then they start to kind of work themselves back out of the hole and then it's okay. But I'm curious in terms of a workshop setting of getting people to have fierce conversations and really be truthful because I've definitely experienced circumstances where there is a fear of actually speaking truth to the boss. And regardless of whether that's the executive team, the people underneath the executive team, really giving their thoughts directly to, especially in a founder-led company, because you do have somebody that's very attached to
Right.
their vision and goal and very strong usually in what they believe to be true or not, and can sometimes have little to no patience for anybody who wants to disagree with them when they are full-heartedly, full body, I'm right, this is where we're going. What would be kind of a trick or maybe a question you would ask to them to help them kind of step out of that fear to communicate what's going on or an idea they have?
There's so much orchestration that goes into a good workshop behind the scenes. The prep in advance takes weeks, right? And it's
Yeah.
understanding what do you want the outcome to be, and then you create all of the activities. Who's going to be there for one, right? You have to know all of that, and then you create all the activities that ladder up to that ultimate result that you're looking for. And there will be topics along the way that, depending on who's in the room, are going to be potentially confrontational. Those moments, you really want to leverage more of an anonymous type of activity where people are writing things down and turning them in, but with no name ascribed to it, or, post-it note sessions where it's just put everything on the wall and then reading them up
Yes.
with anonymity too. So those are really powerful for people to be able to say what they want without having to be concerned about what their boss is thinking or whatever. And so then you start to see, like, if you do some affinity mapping for those types of things, like there's a big cluster of things here that's actually not what the leader is saying. There's a gap. Let's talk about that gap, right? And then trying to bridge that gap. And those can be powerful moments as well because a good leader can feel humbled or vulnerable in that moment, and you have to give anybody, especially a leader, a place. You don't want to back them into a corner. You have to give them a place where they can kind of change their perspective or mind to say, well, what I was saying was this, but it was actually, there's a nuance here that blah, 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 and leaves room for them to change their mind with dignity and grace. So it's all orchestration about how to have conversations with people when there's a hierarchy and understanding that there are sensitive topics and all of that. It's about navigating through all of that. Business is messy. People are messy. But this is what's required to do big things, is going through that messy part of it and addressing the human level as well as the other, process and systems level challenges. It's all part of it. You can't ignore the people part.
Yeah. And to kind of connect the art piece back in from your perspective, how has kind of art informed your sort of strategic insights and kind of if I think about like weaving people and like all the different kind of patterns and different things come up, how does that kind of your brain mesh all those things together?
For me, what I'm doing in my professional role is taking abstract ideas and making them concrete, right? You're taking strategy and you're turning it into action. What I'm doing in my abstract paintings is taking my lived experience, things that I'm noticing in the world and patterns that are real, and abstracting them into something that is more about feeling. And so it's really the inverse that I'm doing in my artwork, which is very necessary for my brain, I've found out,
Yeah.
is that I need to kind of go both directions. But the other thing too, so much of the work that I do is about creativity and learning about how to see the world, how to process, like you mentioned, patterns and see the world in that regard. But also, I find that painting is, for me, it's kind of like building a muscle. You have to be comfortable to do this type of work professionally. You have to be comfortable with not knowing something for a sustained period of time. You may not have the answers. You have to be able to sit with the unknown and sometimes a fear. You're getting toward a deadline. And you're like, I don't have the answer yet, but I know it's there. And you have to be able to sit there and kind of interrogate that in so many different ways. And the other thing about creativity that I've learned and is so important to what I do is that creativity happens a lot for me, and it's been proven elsewhere too. There are studies on this during transitions. So when people are, say, oh, I have my best ideas when I'm in a shower or whatever, it's because that's a transitional moment, right? They're doing one thing and they're transitioning to another. And the brain does some really interesting things during those transitional moments. So if I'm sitting here focusing on something for an hour, I may not find that answer because I'm focusing so much on it. But if I get up and I walk over and do something else, throw the ball for the dog or whatever it is, suddenly I've just had some sort of transitional moment where ideas started to kind of collide that didn't make sense before. And now you're like, oh, it's obvious. Or it can happen when you're, just waking up in the morning or just about to, drift off to sleep. It's those transitional moments that you can allow for and listen for some novel approaches to some things. So
Yeah.
I think that's
That's
how
always
art
the
helps me.
biggest thing I say for when people are stuck too. And I think hybrid environments or work from home environments have a little bit more, I'll say creativity and breaks sometimes. But as you mentioned, dog walks, I'm like, yeah, when everything's tense and I feel stuck or stressed within my body, okay, go for a walk, come back. Or I always ask people, like, what are the things you do outside of here that allows you to just kind of like not think about work, whether that's going to do a workout or something. And mid workout, you have to like, oh, I understand the problem now. And now I know how to fix it because you're distracted and focused on something different or using a different muscle where your brain can just actually kind of let go and problem solve for you. Is there any sort of advice you have, for leaders to kind of merge those creative impulses and then, cross them over with some like analytical kind of process driven pieces from, I think your roadmaps instantly of how you can kind of blend A and B to allow that muscle to continue to build?
I hate that I'm going to say this because it's incredibly cliche to cite Steve Jobs, but I'm going to because it reinforces kind of what I'm saying, slightly different than what your question is. But
Yeah.
early on, when he was creating his campus, there was a strong request and desire for the various units, the various groups to have soda machines and snacks and everything else on their floor or in their area. And he said, absolutely not. We're going to have a cafe or a central meeting place downstairs that everybody has to go to. And the rationale was that those moments between working, going down and getting a soda or snack or whatever is a transitional moment, but also you are likely to bump into somebody else and have a conversation. And that's where the magic happens. And so, as I've worked in, Silicon Valley for 20 years now or so, you can get food and everything else pretty much at arm's length. And a lot of them don't abide by that particular philosophy. But I love to get up, go into the kitchen, grab coffee or something like that, because I do bump into other people and they'll say, what are you working on? And then you think, oh, I'm working on this other thing. Well, tell me more about that, right? Or they were doing, I found out the research team was doing research on something that was adjacent to what I was doing, but I had no idea. And then
Yeah.
we started sharing those types of ideas. And then suddenly, and I would come back with a new approach to it, right? So it's those collisions, those moments whenever you can allow yourself to open up and be free and not so tight and focused. That is really, you need both, right? There's no question you need focus in business or anything you're doing, but you also need time to dream and to be free and to explore those ideas. And that's a muscle that if you're self-aware, you can kind of feel yourself doing that or allowing for the time and space for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think those transitional moments are going to get more and more important as we lean more and more into AI. As much as you might get sick and tired of talking to your digital
Yes.
twin, you might need to get some human connectivity in there to produce some other neurons firing within the brain. As I kind of think about the art piece, the AI piece, storytelling, kind of road mapping to get to where, vision meets reality, you know, if strategy kind of is story, what story do you hope to kind of shape the world?
I mean, I keep coming back to this idea of connection. I think it's harder and harder and harder when we have such a reliance on digital to connect to people. This is a form of connection for sure, having a conversation like this. If technology is going to be a proxy for connection to something other than you and external, that could be a problem. We're already seeing, social media and its effects on youth, and they're feeling isolated, even though they're more connected than ever, right? So we have to be aware of what's out there and our abilities to adapt. Human beings don't adapt as fast as technology does. And so culture and all of this, we're seeing some things break. And it's the natural evolution of things, I guess, but we should be aware of it and mindful of it. But for me, my story is, how do I connect people with brands or companies that are doing good things that solve problems, right? And how do I then connect people within the organizations to want to do good things for humanity, whether they're customers or beyond, right? It's like, I think we have to connect people. I mean, this is what we have. This is who we are. This is what really matters. And that
Yeah,
connection is important.
I love that. And what maybe advice would you have for people listening to kind of harness their ability sort of to creatively storytell in their work and in their leadership, where they might be feeling stuck or they're not really sure how to go about it?
Well, when you are trying to tell a story to people, you have to understand the various lenses by which they're looking at the world, right? And where they are. And you have to figure out, how do you tell a story that resonates with the greatest number of people that can make sense. And sometimes it's not the same story. Sometimes you have to learn how to tell the same story in different terms from their
Yeah.
perspective. The CFO is going to have a different lens than the CTO is going to, right? And the CEO. So you have to look at those and say, what do they care about? What are they evaluating this from? And be able to meet them where they are and understand that that's the narrative, is something that meets them so where they are, so they can understand it and actually be a proponent for what you're trying to do.
I love it. And I feel like it all connects. And the underlying theme is just really, in general, people need to seek to understand instead of forcing a narrative down somebody's throat that they
So true.
aren't aren't wanting to hear, and or coming from such a place where that lens is not even a possibility at that point. So I think, yeah, back to like language being so important from a communication standpoint, a leadership standpoint, and then also, from a vision to tangible pieces along the way to make something successful. And so I think that's a great place to sort of round it out and get into some rapid fire questions here to close our time out. Talk to us about the first non-business passion you fell in love with.
First one, I don't know. I can tell you the deepest passion that I've had, and it's more recent than probably a first passion, but that was I've always loved music, but when I started playing guitar about 15 years ago, it changed my entire relationship with music. And I've just was incredibly passionate. I was playing multiple times a day. I just couldn't get enough. Still playing and still love it. And it's just so meaningful to me. So I'd say playing music is just incredible.
I loved it. And I'm curious, what was the spark that set off the interest to learn how to play?
Well, I always wanted to play, but I always thought, I'd see friends that had guitars and I was afraid to touch them. It just seemed so fragile. And who am I to touch that? I have no reason to that. Yeah, so I was talking to somebody who had a music school, and they said, look, I've tried to learn piano through, studying, music and all that. It just doesn't resonate. I said, I need to learn like the old blues musicians did, sitting on a porch, strumming some chords, then tell me why it works. And he said, "Oh, I've got somebody for you." And so I started
Yeah,
taking lessons at that point, and it just all made sense at that point. And I wish I had done it so much sooner in life.
I love that. And what is your favorite productivity tool you can't live without?
I have been talking about this tool for well over a year now, but it continues to just be a game changer for me. And it's a just a different browser, a different web browser that is it kind of changed my life. I know it's a hyperbole, but it's called the Arc browser.
Okay.
ARC browser, and it's just set up in a different way. So we talked about multifaceted earlier, and so it's perfect for me because I can set up various spaces for my various facets, right? I'm on the board of a nonprofit. I have a space for that has all my logins to the Google Suite and everything else. And I can switch over to a business context, manage my business with that space. I can go to a client one that is specific to theirs, and everything is segmented. All my logins, all my tabs, everything. And so I can switch context between any of them at any time very quickly. And so it's perfect for me.
I love that. Kind of going back to sort of music. If you could orchestrate a duet between an AI agent and an artist, what would they create?
You know, I'd have to think about. I guess I was thinking of AI more in the context of physical art, or
Sure.
in a way. So let me
However
yeah.
you want to absorb it.
I think it would be fascinating to. I don't really do sculpture, but I would love to create something that sits in the middle of a place, a communal place that is able to be AI that can find connections between other people in that space and almost force those collisions,
Mm,
right?
I
It's
like
like,
that.
hey, you're standing there, you're over there, you both have the same sneakers on, come here, right? Whatever it may be. And then kind of facilitate that to just try to use AI to encourage that type of interaction.
Like an AI matchmaker.
Kind of. And I know we're kind of running out of time, but let me just share something else that's been core to how I go about the world. And it's something a friend of mine taught me. And I call it 3 by 30. But if you're within 3 feet of somebody for 30 seconds, you have to speak to them. So
Mm,
imagine you're in an elevator, on a subway train, whatever it may be, and it forces you to be your authentic self of how to break the ice to talk to somebody else. And it leads to some really incredible conversations and meeting new people. And sometimes it means it's nothing, right? But it's a really great way for just connecting with other people.
yeah, I love that. I'm going to use that one now. I'm going to tell a couple of friends about that one. They'll enjoy it and laugh like, sorry, I've been around these people long enough, have to go over and talk to them.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, no, that's a good
yeah,
one.
yeah.
What's one book or, piece of art that changed how you see the world?
I'll give you art first. Years ago, went to a show at the San Francisco MoMA by an LA artist, contemporary LA artist named Mark Bradford. Abstract found objects, and just the way he creates these incredibly large pieces that they are beautiful as you're looking at them from a distance, and then you come in, you start inspecting what they're made of and how they're made, and it's kind of got a collage type of feel, but they are just jaw-dropping and continue to inspire me of how he makes them and what they're all about. For a book, this may be a little bit cliche as well, but one that really changed early on in my professional career, I read Crossing the Chasm, which is a pretty well-known book that some deride and some still love. But what it did it gave me a sense for that there are people that look at technology and on an adoption curve, and what you're trying to tell them is they may not be ready for it just because of their mindset. So it really was the beginning of me understanding that people have different mindsets, and you want to address them later as the product evolves or whatever it may be. So it gave me the freedom to be able to talk to people and recognize who they were, and maybe they weren't ready for this conversation yet. So that was literally the first time of like, how do you meet people where they're at so that you can have the right conversation and the right story at the right time.
Yeah, I love that. And last, in your own words, define what built for this means to you.
Built from this feels like a rally cry to me. It feels like, in the face of a challenge, it's something you would say, no, I'm built for this, right? And it's that realization of the expertise you have, the experience you have, and the resources that you have to be able to meet that moment and say, okay, I'm built for this. Let's go. Right. So to me, it's a very encouraging rally cry.
I love that. I haven't heard rally cry yet. I'm here for that one. Well, I appreciate you taking time. It was so great to connect with you and learn all about your story. And if people have resonated with the way that you approach business and strategy and building that narrative, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
You can email me, jonah@mindarc.com, and it's mind-arc.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also see my art at jonahburlingame.com. And my website is mind-arc.com.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jonah. It was so great to meet you.
You as well. Thank you for this. I loved it.
Thank you.